Henry VIII is perhaps the most well-known of all England's monarchs, but no one remembers Henry VIII fondly. He murdered 2 of his 6 wives, divorced 2 more, lost 1 in childbirth, and died before he could murder the last one. When you ask pretty much anyone what Henry VIII was all about, they'll mostly just repeat some version of the above, because when you're a wife-killing, smelly egomaniac with 0 redeeming qualities, it doesn't really matter what else you did in your life. People will remember you for being a wife-killing, smelly egomaniac with 0 redeeming qualities. Henry's contemporaries like to remember the king's body count being somewhere in the neighborhood of 57,000 to 72,000 executions. But Henry VIII was so much more than just those things. He was also greedy, paranoid, a hypocrite, a homophobe, a perpetual loser of wars, and gross. He was very, very gross. Did he have any actual redeeming qualities? Not that we know of. If he did, they were overshadowed by all of the very bad things he did during his long, awful reign. What bad things? These bad things. Here's the horrible, messed up truth of Henry VIII. Henry VIII inherited a wealthy kingdom from his dad. When Henry VII left this world, he had the equivalent of $494 million, which went to his son, who was all, "How can I waste this on lavish parties and crap I don't need in the shortest amount of time possible?" According to history, he blew most of the kingdom's annual revenue on Christmas parties. Yes, everyone loves an epic party, and plenty of modern people go into debt so that they can buy nice things for everyone on their holiday list. But imagine spending $18 million in a single year. Henry's holiday expenses included food, entertainment, and gifts. That kind of excess continued throughout all of Henry's reign. In fact, he was so into parties that he expanded the kitchens of Hampton Court Palace, so they filled 55 rooms. Banquets frequently served up to 14 courses to 600 people and included dishes like grilled beaver tails, whole roasted peacock, and boar's head. So you could say Henry ate his kingdom's fortune, and that would actually be close to accurate. By 1527, it became clear that Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, wasn't going to give the king a son and heir. The solution to that problem was pretty simple. Henry could divorce her and marry someone else. There was that one court lady, Anne Boleyn, that he was into. So it was pretty cut and dry as far as the king was concerned. But the Pope was all, that didn't seem to bother you when you married her, so no. And Henry was all, fine, I'll just invent a new religion, the Church of England, then become supreme head and grant my own divorce. And that's pretty much exactly what he did, although it was many, many years in the making. Henry's contemporaries like to remember the king's body count being somewhere in the neighborhood of 57,000 to 72,000 executions. According to the BS historian, that was like 2.6% of the entire population of England. So the number is probably not super accurate. However, it is true that Henry executed a lot of people. Anyone who didn't agree with the act of succession was considered guilty of treason. You couldn't even criticize Henry's marriage. Ironically, the act of succession required everyone to take an oath recognizing Anne Boleyn as the rightful queen, and all their children as legitimate heirs to the throne. Though, evidently, Henry himself never took that oath since he had Anne executed, and their daughter declared illegitimate after Anne failed to give him the son he wanted. But that's not all. Henry also executed heretics, potential rivals to the throne, including a 67-year-old woman, the associates of both his doomed wives, the leaders of the uprising called the Pilgrimage of Grace, and Thomas Cromwell. Among Henry's many victims was a woman named Elizabeth Barton. Elizabeth Barton was a nun, and Henry didn't like her. Why? Barton was sort of a minor celebrity because she'd become a nun not long after she began having visions of marvelous holiness in rebuke of sin and vice. And one of her many visions had to do with the divorce of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Barton predicted that the divorce would be Henry's downfall. If he married Anne Boleyn, she said, Henry would lose his kingdom and die a villain's death. This was obviously a threat to Henry's long tradition of doing whatever the heck he wanted to do without rebuke, so he had Barton arrested. He then made up a bunch of stuff about her improper relationship with priests and coerced her into saying she'd just made up all of her prophecies. Then he executed her and gave her the dubious honor of becoming the only woman to ever have her head put on a spike on London Bridge. According to History Extra, Henry VIII had a groom of the stool. And although it's possible stool might have referred to a piece of furniture you put your feet on, it also had another very literal meaning. The grooms of the stool did exactly what you're thinking. They wiped the king's butt and changed his underwear. According to Historic UK, after Henry's Act of Supremacy in 1534, where he declared himself the leader of the newly formed Church of England, he started eyeballing the monasteries, which were not only symbols of the Catholic Church, but also symbols of the Catholic Church that had a lot of money. And let's not forget how much Henry liked to spend money. With his own coffers mostly drained from all of his lavish parties, Henry decided to seize the property of all the monasteries in England. In lands alone, that amounted to roughly a quarter of all of England's farmland. Henry liked war, even though he stank at it. He probably only liked war because he thought there would be financial gain or power at the end of it. But he never seemed to figure out that war never did anything for him except cost him a lot of money. According to history, during Henry's reign, he attempted to conquer Scotland, which ticked off the Scots and encouraged them to ally with France. Meanwhile, Henry alienated the Holy Roman Emperor, who was his first wife's nephew, because of the whole "I want to divorce your aunt" thing. And when you alienate your allies, they generally don't want to help you fight your dumb wars. Henry went to war with France 3 times, though the 3rd time he was so overweight he couldn't ride a horse anymore and had to be carried to the battle lines on a litter. By the end of the war, he'd gained the port of Boulogne, but he was practically bankrupt, so it wasn't even worth it. Also, Henry's son, Edward, sold the port back to France, which makes it all extra not worth it. But by then, Henry was dead. To be fair, the Anne Boleyn files notes that Henry seems to have been the only one who thought Anne of Cleves was ugly. He disliked her so much that he evidently called her a Flanders mare, though it's somewhat questionable whether or not he actually used those words, given that Anne wasn't from Flanders. At any rate, their brief marriage was never consummated, and Henry had it annulled not long after their wedding. But hey, she got a consolation prize, the title Right Dear and Entirely Beloved Sister, which came with a palace, a manor, and a steady annual income. Also, she got to keep her head. Not bad for one of Henry's wives. A lot of the world's villains never really pay for their crimes, and Henry VIII was certainly never brought to official justice for all of the people he murdered and all the times he made the groom of the stool wipe his butt and change his underpants. Unofficially, though, he kind of got what was coming to him. He weighed nearly 400 pounds when he died, and as a result, he suffered from a myriad of health problems, including ulcers on his legs that were constantly open, often infected, and really smelly. According to the Tudor Society, he couldn't walk, which contributed to his weight gain. Plus, he binge ate usually around 5,000 calories a day. And he suffered from migraines related to a head injury he'd gotten while jousting. Without exhuming the poor dude, It's impossible to know the extent of his health problems, but it's likely he also had high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes. He probably died from renal and liver failure, leaving his sixth wife, Catherine Parr, almost certainly breathing a sigh of relief